Welcome to Small Spark Theory. This podcast is designed as a collection of thoughts, ideas, and practical tips on using marginal gains to help your agency new business endeavours. Small Spark Theory is hosted and created by Lucy Mann, founder of Gunpowder Consulting.
Okay, welcome back to Small Spark Theory. We have a fascinating guest with us today. I'm delighted to welcome Katz Kiely. Katz is an award-winning pioneer and was the inventor of the world's first open innovation competition in 2003. She's a respected voice in the areas of digital communication, transformation and innovation, and specialises in multidisciplinary design, systems thinking and culture change. And she's successfully guided global businesses like GSK, HP, and most unbelievably, United Nations, which slightly blew my mind. Anyway, Katz is now CEO of Kiely & Co., a boutique consultancy that supports clients using her people-powered transformation approach. Now, what does this have to do with new business? I hear you cry. Well, Katz and I were chatting earlier this year about marginal gains, actually sharing our love for the superstar behavioural economist Dan Ariely. And it occurred to me that some of the problems that we face in agency new business often stem from disorganisation. I know that's something that we've talked about before, about how resource and time is squeezed on new business and marketing because we're all focusing on billable time. But if we could be better organised, both in our marketing and new business planning, in our pitching, how we work together as teams, then surely that's got to increase our effectiveness. So welcome, Katz. Thank you for joining us on Small Spark Theory.
It's a pleasure.
You've had a fascinating career, and it would be lovely if you could just share with our listeners a little taster of how you got to where you are today.
So I won't start at the very beginning. I'll start a bit further on. So I started an agency in 2003 because it seemed really clear to me that the big monolithic companies, if they didn't start to understand what digital was going to do to the landscape, to the economic, social, everything else landscape, they would probably end up shrinking and dying. So the first thing that we did was start to figure out how we could help the big companies to connect in a meaningful way with startups and digital agencies. Because by that point I had quite a big network of digital agencies and they weren't actually called startups in those days. So what we did was help big companies figure out exactly what their why was, by which I mean, what is it you're really struggling with right now? What can we help you with? Clarify that, which is always something that's the most important and most difficult thing to do with clients. You've got to really understand their why. And then at that point, we'd then use that trigger question, put that out to our network of startups and ask those startups to respond. Then we would find the best of those startups. We would then teach them how to pitch, because actually the way that startups pitch and the way that large companies listen are two very, very different things. And then we'd get the startups prepared in front of the board, and then the board would get really excited, and the startups would get really excited, and then the board would go, I want you, and everybody was really excited. And then a year later, we figured out that what was happening was they'd get chewed up and spat out, which was neither good for the big company or for the startup. So then we started thinking, what's going on here? And we started looking at the kind of organisational structure of these big companies and realised that bringing something in which is so fundamentally different behaviourally to a big organisation, if the organisation isn't ready for it, the corporate antiviruses will just kind of push that weird thing out of their door. So then we started looking at how we could start to help the big companies just get better at being more like startups. So by which I mean multidisciplinary workshops to start breaking down the walls between boundaries, setting up innovation labs with them and doing the kind of open innovation piece on the inside of corporations, just to get people to collaborate and talk to each other and create together in a different way. And then, as you said, I got headhunted by the UN, which there aren't many women who can say that. And it wasn't just the UN, it was the particular part of the UN that's called the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. Their mission is to connect the world. When I arrived, I got taken in to see the head honcho. And he said, Katz, you cannot tweet about what you're doing in here. And I said, you can't tell me what I can and can't tweet in my personal channels. What's your social media policy? And bearing in mind their mission is to connect the world, he said, our policy, Katz, is to tell people not to use it.
Really?
So, yeah, that's where we started.
Wow.
And by the end of that year, having kind of tacked together all of the approach and the methodology that I'd learned working with big companies from the outside, we managed to go through a massive transformation process. And it ended up with 6,500 world leaders from policy and from telecommunications together in Geneva, connected to 20,000 telecentres across the world and 10,000 children in schools. So the kids in the schools actually drove the conversation in Geneva, it was a hell of a journey. A hell of a journey.
And rewarding.
It was the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life, but I learned more from it than I've ever learned in my life.
Well done. Well navigated, which brings us up to today.
So I came back from the UN, and after I'd licked my wounds, as women, I think we're always really tough on ourselves. But then I realised that actually what I'd managed to do is to take an incredibly traditional organisation through a massive journey of change against everybody's expectations. So what I heard many times was, how on earth did you manage to do that? So then I started thinking, what is it about change that people find so difficult? And what is it about this approach to change that works when other approaches don't? And it was then I fell in love with Dan Ariely. So then I started thinking, if you understand how the brain is hardwired, then you can really start to figure out why certain things are problematic and why they're not. And you can start to create frameworks and systems and processes in ways that work for the human brain, rather than doing what we're doing now, which is doing exactly the opposite.
Yeah. Our audience is primarily made up of creative and digital agencies, some PR agencies, ranging from anything from 2 people all the way up to 200 and 300 people. You'd think in some ways that the organisational problems and the stakeholder engagement would be less in the companies that size, but it doesn't seem to be the case. What's your experience?
My experience is that we've grown up with a particular idea of how an organisation should work. And so even when we start companies with an idea of how we're going to run that company, we somehow fall back into what's normal. So we end up very quickly with silos, with command and control leadership, with thinkers and doers being separate. We fall back into the kind of old style of organisational systems because it's normal, because it's what we've always... And I think that's the easiest thing to do. I was talking to a friend of mine over in Silicon Valley recently. He runs a startup over there. He started his company, had all of these ideas about he's going to build a new company with new organisational methods and approaches. It was going to be really flat and really non-hierarchical. And so I'm talking to him about the kind of problems that big organisations have. And he's getting progressively quieter and looking progressively more miserable. And I'm like, you okay, Paul? And he says, I've created a dinosaur. Because I'm under so much pressure, I've just disappeared back into what's normal.
Yeah.
It's the easiest thing to do, is to build a company that you think is the norm.
Yeah.
And it's also the most stupid thing to do.
Yeah. Because what's that saying about if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always had?
Exactly that. Which is incredibly disengaged and disenfranchised employees.
Yes.
And bearing in mind that, looking at the Gallup figures, 70% of the worldwide workforce is disengaged with their job.
Wow.
And actually only 13% are highly engaged with their job. No matter which way you look at that figure, that means that we've got 3.5 million people just in London going into work every day, actually not caring about what they do.
Yeah, which is food for thought when you think about the area that I'm focused on, which is about new business performance. To perform well in new business, you have to be completely engaged, completely on your game and focused, and you require the team around you to be the same and communicating and operating as one. You can't be siloed. So there's a lot of room for improvement there.
Massive. Yeah, and I think the people you're dealing with are the people who are touching the customer.
Yeah.
And if the people who are touching the customer aren't 100% happy with where they are, the customer's going to feel that.
Yeah.
And if you also understand the importance of purpose, shared purpose, on the way that people's minds operate, you don't put people in a situation where they don't feel part of the company. I often go in to see clients, big or small companies, and they assume that their people are 100% in. And I'll ask them, when was the last time you asked them? Oh, yeah, we did an employee engagement survey a year ago. Okay, so how do you listen to the people across your organisation to find out whether or not they're happy? Always greeted with the same silence.
Yeah.
People are so busy doing things, they forget to do the thing that's most important and most productive,
Yeah.
which is make sure people are 100% in and
Yeah.
feel like they're really proud of what the company's doing.
Yeah.
You know, you look at companies like Zappos.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that probably everybody who's listening to that knows all about Zappos. I met Tony Shea from Zappos at Burning Man. And in a way, it was because of those conversations with him and Chip Conley from Airbnb, et cetera, that I decided to do what I'm doing now. Because Tony's starting point with Zappos was, what happens if you create a company which is all around culture? If you make sure that every single person at every touch point, no matter where, what supplier or what customer is touching your organisation, if they're all so proud of working for a company, what happens then? And so he does all sorts of really smart things, as an example, all based on behavioural economics and behavioural psychology, one of which is counterintuitive, I guess, on many levels. Everybody, doesn't matter whether they're CFO or intern, has to do the same week of interviews. It's very experiential, it's very playful, and through that they figure out whether or not you're the right kind of person to join Zappos. They actually call them Zapponians. It's a cult. If then they think you're right for them, they'll bring you in and say, we really like you. But if you're not sure about whether you like us or not, we will give you $2,000 to leave now. In fact, they give them 2 weeks. Crikey. But that means that when you think about it, with the way that the brain operates, money's really important to us, as Dan Ariely says in all of his work.
Yeah.
And so by saying, I have just refused $2,000, you're going to post-rationalise that.
Yeah.
So you're in.
Yes.
You're 100% in. And they do all sorts of lovely things. I mean, at the end of the day, Zappos is a call centre, right?
Yeah.
But they still have their cubicles, but they have awards for personalising their cubicles. In fact, they have awards for everything. It's all about reward and recognition and reinforcement of the behaviours that they want to nurture. And interestingly, and this again is counterintuitive for many traditional organisations, which most of them are, they allow all of their employees to see all of their data all of the time.
Right.
That transparency, that trust, that empathy is massively powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it bonds people.
It takes away those barriers, doesn't it? It takes away the kind of them and us barrier. And I can see how, I mean, certainly in my experience, the agencies that I've come across over the years that have been the most successful have probably been the ones who've really invested in their culture. And I think it's hard for agencies when, you know, it's really competitive, times are tough, you know, it feels like at the moment we're going through another stressful times where, you know, marketing budgets are being cut, there's a lot of uncertainty. So agencies are kind of nervously looking at their new business pipelines. And I think when you're in a situation like that and you're so focused on delivering for your clients, it's easy to overlook the people in your business, when you're focused on looking at the numbers and delivering everything that your clients want and thinking about where the next revenue is coming from, that you can easily overlook your people.
Yeah, too easily. And I think it's the easiest thing in the world to get into busy mode.
Yeah.
We're so busy being busy that we actually forget the thing that gives you most shareholder value at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And if you can figure out how to listen to your people and figure out the things that are not working for them, then you save so much money. And in the process, you get people to feel like they're part of something they want to be part of.
Yeah.
And we all know, I mean, to get a new senior leader in when one leaves, it costs 300% their salary.
Yeah.
So making sure people are happy and engaged and feel proud of being part of your organisation is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And so while we're all busy being busy, we're all busily throwing money away.
So Izzy and I were only just talking this morning about how when you ask or you try and track back where some of the pieces of business, where some of your client relationships started, and it turns out that it was, somebody... your husband plays football with somebody that works in an organisation, or it's somebody that one of your team met at the school gates who happens to be starting up a new brand. And if they don't feel engaged, if they don't feel like they're fully engaged in their role and feeling fully fired up as a team member in the agency, then they're not going to make that transition by making an introduction from their social life into their professional world.
Completely agree. And actually, if you can make sure that every single person inside your organisation is your ambassador,
yes,
by which I mean to everybody they meet just go, oh my God, it's the most creative place I've ever worked at in my life.
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
Yeah.
People want to be part of that.
They do. They want to come on the journey with you.
They do.
Yeah.
And similarly, if you're going in for it, doesn't matter who you're pitching to, it's so easy to think that people want to hear statistics and numbers and let's impress them. And the best thing you can do to sell to somebody is to make them love you.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind, we make decisions in this way. Our lizard brain immediately goes, do I like this person, or is he a threat, or she? And then you start adding a bit of kind of common sense around that. And then you talk. So essentially, that feeling, or that Simon Sinek why, is how people make business decisions. And if you don't understand, if you walk into a room glowing, you can sell ice to an Eskimo.
Yeah. Yeah. So we need to create that glow in everybody in the business. Good. So I'm going to ask for your top 3 tips, Katz, on how you can get that glow in your employees.
It's really, really important to be very clear about what your cultural behaviours are. If you don't really understand the power of culture and you can't be clear about what that is, you have no brand, because your culture is your brand. I've worked at companies where I've started talking about brand and they've gone, yeah, we should bring in a brand agency. No. Brand is something that should be in the DNA of your culture. It should be in every action that everybody takes all the way. Designing a new logo, designing a new look and feel, that isn't the brand. The brand is your heart. So be really clear about that. And then once you've established what those behaviours are that you want your organisation to have, the leadership needs to display those behaviours. Because if you say one thing and behave in a different way, that's awful. You need to have a listening platform, by which I mean bringing in an employee engagement survey agency once a year. And I've heard recently that people bribe their employees to fill in the questionnaires. That's not useful data. You need to be constantly making sure you bring your people together so that they're constantly being reminded about what it is you're trying to do together and make them feel like they're part of a gang. At the end of the day, we still have the same brain as when we were on the savannah back in the day, in prehistory.
Yes.
And we need to always be aware of the fact that our brains still respond in these ways. By which I mean, we've got two key states of being. One of them is the reward state, which we evolved so that we could keep communities together. And it was the fact that we could keep communities together that meant we won over the Neanderthals, because they were very solitary. In the reward state, we're innovative and communicative and collaborative, all the good ifs, because that's what you need to keep communities together. And then we've got the threat state. So the threat state, or fight or flight, whatever you want to call it, we evolved so that if we were being charged by a saber-toothed tiger, we could get away really quickly and not get eaten. So it was more important to be able to run away and survive than it was to keep communities together. So we've got 6 times more neural pathways, which are constantly looking for threat. What on earth has that got to do with business? Well, what that's got to do with business is every time in an organisation, you tell your employees something new is going to happen, you throw a change at them, they immediately go into the stress state.
Right.
And we're herd creatures. So if one person goes stressful, why is that coming at me? What does it mean to me? How is it going to affect me? Everybody else does too. So communicate. Communicate. It's the simplest thing in the world. In silence lies fear. The more that you can be open about why you're making decisions and make people feel that those decisions are theirs, that they have some ownership of them, the easier it will be for your people. The other thing, and the reason that we're building the technology platform that we're building right now, is because what tends to happen inside organisations, even in small organisations, is somebody may be doing something that they know is pointless or they know it could be done better. And they might tell their immediate line manager, this is a waste of my time. And the line manager might say, that's the way we do things.
Ah, yes.
That thing. That is the most stupid organisational structure you can have, because you can bet your life that that person, if you could actually bring that problem out into the air, you can actually bring people around it to solve it fairly quickly quite often. But you need to make sure you're listening. So that when we're talking about marginal gains, what the platform that we're building does is to encourage people to fess up about the problems.
Great.
And if enough people gather around the problem, then the senior leadership get to hear about it. At the moment, senior leadership only ever hear what middle management want them to hear, right?
Right.
Until it's too late.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Uber.
Yeah.
Look at 500 startups. If they'd have had these kind of human sensors alerted around and had a way of actually listening to what they were saying, they would have avoided the 10 billion they've just lost off their shareholder value.
Like an early warning system.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us a bit about the platform that you're building.
So I can't tell you a huge amount about it.
No,
but,
top secret.
I've worked in lots of different sorts of organisations. Senior leaders make the fatal mistake of thinking they can just buy a license for a technology and everything will be okay. No, for all the reasons we talked about, because if you tell people they have to use a new technology and they can't see what's in it for them, they will do anything in their power to avoid that new technology. And I was talking to a friend of mine, actually, who works for a global agency. They've just bought a license for Jira. It's going to make everyone's life easier. CTO's really happy. Roll it out. Nobody's using it.
Yeah.
How many times have we all seen that?
Yeah.
So what the platform does is turn it upside down. It starts with what's in it for the individual across the organisation. It's based on cognitive science. It gives people an opportunity to say what isn't working for them. People like a good moan, right?
Yeah.
Then it gives them a chance to support each other with that. People like that. And then when a problem gets big enough or enough people support that problem, the system also knows who's most engaged or affected by that problem, by how they're interacting. And so it knows which people that it should bring together to co-create a solution. And what the technology platform that we're building is doing is basically taking an approach that I've been using for the last 10 years in a kind of analog or tacking together whatever bits of technology are already there and turning it into an integrated platform that works the way that people work.
So what's it going to be called and when are we going to see it?
So it's called BEEP. It's the Behavioural Enterprise Engagement Platform. It'll be out in about a year. It's aimed at large enterprise, but it's amazing how many times when I've shown people the demo and the prototype, even if they're working in small companies, they'll go, oh my God, we really need that.
We need that.
So my dream is when you're in one of those awful meetings and somebody's whinging about something, somebody else will say, why don't you just beep it?
Brilliant. Oh, we'll look forward to that. Katz, tell us, have you got a favourite book or a TED Talk that we can share with our listeners? Because we will be giving away a copy of your favourite book, or one of your favourite books. So we'll be giving one of those away to a lucky tweeter. So tell us which books you would recommend.
So the book that changed my life is by Dan Ariely.
Brilliant.
We are the Dan Ariely fan club.
Yes.
So when I came back from the UN and I was desperate to find out more about behavioural psychology, I read both of his books. The first one's called Predictably Irrational. The second one's called The Upside of Irrationality. And basically, the first one explains the cognitive biases that drive us. I found it quite shocking in that when you're reading it, I'm not like that. I'm not a herd creature. I don't make decisions that way. But then you find yourself doing things where actually you realise that we're all like that.
Yeah.
The second one is super interesting in that it's saying, but don't be freaked out by that irrationality. Once we understand it, then we can start to create frameworks and systems that make sense for people rather than for the people that make them. So it's a brilliant book. It changed the way that I see the world. And I'm really lucky in that Dan has become a really good friend of mine and an advisor, primarily because I was really cheeky and reached out to him on LinkedIn and said, you keep saying that technology people need to understand your research. I'm making technology that's based on your research. I need to know you. And he came back. He linked in with me. And still he says, I've got no idea why, because I never do that. So there's magic and serendipity at play.
There is. There certainly is. Any advice, any golden nuggets of advice that you've been given that have stuck with you?
Yeah. So I suppose the best advice I've ever been given is, and I fully intend when I get my new office to get this written in neon signs, 100% me and the best I can be. By which I mean, just be the person you are, because people will pick it up if you're not being who you are. And that feeling of insincerity will lose your sales.
Brilliant. I love that. On that note, Katz Kiely, thank you so much. I know you've got a very busy schedule, so I'm delighted that you've been able to come today and share your insight with us. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure. You can win a copy of Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. We've got a copy here that we're going to be giving away to a lucky tweeter. So join in the conversation on Twitter using hashtag #SmallSparkTheory and we'll pick a winner and send a copy through in the post. Join us next month where we're going to be talking about pitching, and I'll be joined by AAR consultant Tony Spong. You have been listening to Small Spark Theory, brought to you by Gunpowder Consulting. Join in the conversation on Twitter at Gunpowder Tweets, hashtag #SmallSparkTheory. The podcast is created and hosted by me, Lucy Mann. Our editor is Claire Aban and our producer is Isabel Jarvis. Music is provided by Juke Deck, available at jukedeck.com. For more information and to download further episodes, head to our blog at gunpowderconsulting.com. And if you like what you hear, head to iTunes and leave us a star.